Hey guys, I mentioned in my last video that I'd come across a US senator who had upset me, should we say. He really pissed me off, truth be told. So, Senator Bob Menendez and Congresswoman Watson Coleman from New Jersey are championing a piece of legislation which they've had kicking around since 2019 called the Help Empower Americans to Respond Act. H.E.A.R. It almost sounds like they twisted that name together to get themselves a nice acronym, doesn't it? Anyway, the long and the short of it is they want to flat out ban all moderators, all suppressors, federally across the United States, except, of course, for law enforcement. They'd still be allowed to use them. Now, the justification for this is interesting, and I'll get to that in a moment. But what I would like to stress is that both these politicians are on record many times uttering the classic phrase, follow the science. We must follow the science. Now, a lot of us have heard that many times over the past year or two, or three or four. And I'm sure we all have different opinions on what that means and how genuine that may be from various people. This is something we're going to put to the test. I'm going to quote the good senator now and let you know what he thinks is the justification for his piece of legislation, which, as far as I'm concerned, looks a lot like more gun grabbing. He said, gun silencers are devices designed for a very specific purpose: to suppress the sound of gunfire from unsuspecting victims and reduce the chances they can run, hide, take cover, and call the police in an active shooter situation. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, while moderators, suppressors, calling them silencers is simply laughable, but these are devices designed with a very specific purpose. However, given that many of these are both designed and made here in the UK, where we certainly don't have a problem with mass shootings, the idea that these are designed specifically to enable such behaviours it's very hard to express how moronic an idea that is. Nonetheless, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Congressman Coleman had this to say: silencers are not tools of self-defense, they are tools of murder. Let me say that again. Silencers are not tools of self-defense, they are tools of murder. One has to wonder what's going through these people's heads. But as I've said before, these are politicians, and I cannot pretend to understand their thinking all the time, or any of the time, honestly. Now, given that these so-called lawmakers wish to present legislation onto the floor to take such sweeping action based on these statements, and given that they have both professed to follow the science, I feel duty-bound to do some science. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to science the shit out of it. And here's how. I'm going to run a number of sound tests. I'm going to take 4 calibres and types of firearm. I'm going to take a 2.2 rimfire, a long rifle, a 1.7 H.E.A.R, bit of a spicy rimfire. I'm going to take a middling centerfire round, a 2.43 Winchester, and I'm going to take a middling 12 gauge round. Shotgun. We're going to run 3 test shots unsuppressed and 3 test shots suppressed, with our microphone positioned laterally, so out actually to the right hand side of the shot, approximately 35 to 40 yards away, and only a short distance in front of the muzzles, so approximately 5 yards forward, 35-40 yards to the right. In addition, the microphone will be behind a large tree trunk. This should give us some indication of the level of noise you will hear were you to encounter an active shooter situation and you were around a corner, perhaps inside a shop, whatever it may be. We'll conduct the test using SBL cam. This will allow us to monitor sound levels at that microphone throughout the test. And quite obviously, you'll be able to tell when there's a shot, and then we'll be able to see how much noise is generated both with and without a moderator. We'll see what the impact is of that moderator, and if it's realistically going to make any difference to one being able to detect the sound of gunfire. It would appear that the senator believes, or at least professes to believe, that these moderators will make such a difference that you wouldn't know someone was coming. So we have to find out, don't we? If you happen to watch this, Senator, I hope you appreciate my efforts. I will do my best to make sure the conditions are fair, and hopefully you can review this data, take a look at it, and decide what to do based on it. I will show you the ammunition we're going to use. I will explain which firearms are going to be used and why, and then we'll head outside and we shall do the science. So I'm going to put 2 rounds through the 2.2 long rifle, and experienced guys, you'll understand why. The first round I'm going to test is a subsonic round. So that is a round which travels below the speed of sound, and these are specifically designed to be quiet. They're also a lot more stable over longer ranges, but given that they are a much lower powered round than anything supersonic, they're really only good for punching paper target shooting at long range. So the round itself that I'll be using is Ely's hollow point subsonic. These are a 36 grain projectile. They're a very quiet round by design. I freely admit I don't use these myself. This is some leftovers from previous testing, and I don't mind using them up. But from a volume perspective, they are akin to most subsonics. Unfortunately, they're not particularly accurate. Out of my rifle, you may find they work wonderfully for yourself. So that's the first round we'll be firing, and I'll be putting those through my Tippmann M422. This is the next round that we'll be using. This is the Federal Premium V-Shock 17 H.E.A.R polymer tipped varmint round. You may have seen me testing these versus Hornady's own offering the other day. Again, I freely admit I will be using these as a way to use them up. I wouldn't use them in the field. I don't feel they're accurate enough, but they are consistent in volume, in noise, to most other H.E.A.R cartridges. The next round we'll be using is Winchester's Super X Winchester 243 80 grain jacketed soft point. This should be some middle ground for centerfire. It should give us a good idea. Now, before coming into this test, I had a bit of a comparison between what I will call all proper centerfire cartridges, and from that you can assume I'm talking 223 up to and thereabouts 30-06. There is very little difference in their volume at the breech as measured by most professional outfits and as explained by the manufacturers themselves. So I've picked something in the middle. I'll be putting those through my H.E.A.R Scout, obviously moderated, unmoderated. Next up will be 12 gauge. We'll be using Limevale Express Power Blue. These are a very middle of the range 2 3/4 inch cartridge. It's 7.5 shot, fiber wad, and very middle of the road stuff. So it should give us a fair bead on 12 gauge noise levels. We'll be putting these through 2 different shotguns. With shotguns, moderators don't just come on and off so easily. So what I'm using for the unmoderated test, I will use my Benelli M2, and for the moderated test, I will use my Pedretti number 6. Hush power, moderated. Both shotguns have 24-inch barrels, making the comparison fair. Finally, we will come back around to the 2.2 long rifle, and we'll put a supersonic round through it. The one we've chosen for that is CCI's world famous Minimag. That is a 38 grain hollow point, and it's quite aggressive. It's 1275 feet per second, which for long rifle is pretty spicy, and that should give us another good read, I would hope. So a quick word on the moderators. As I've explained previously, my Hush Power shotgun is a dedicated moderated shotgun. That's not removable, but Hush Power are the guys, or certainly have been the guys for many years in moderating shotguns. It's about as good as we're going to get. Both my Tipman M422 and my 243, the Steyr Scout, are moderated by Wildcat. Now, in the UK, Wildcat are considered, if not the best, amongst the best moderators that money can buy. They are exceptionally well made and exceptionally effective. The 2.2 has a Panther moderator. The 243 has an Evolution moderator. And if I say so myself, when I go out and I buy accessories for my firearms, I don't tend to skimp. These are seriously good kit. The 17 H.E.A.R, the Ruger, is moderated by ROG. It is a pretty effective moderator, but 17 H.E.A.R being a very, very fast round for rimfire, coming out at approximately 2,500 feet per second, that breaks the sound barrier with some aggression, and it's quite a loud, snappy round. So while it is moderated, I would be surprised to see the percentage difference being as high as with the Wildcat moderators. So that covers how we're going to approach this. I will head outside now, we'll get set up, and we'll do the science. And hopefully we can show that Senator Menendez is an honourable man and he's looking out to keep you and all your compatriots safe. But forgive me, I am a skeptic and I think he's lying through his teeth, which is why I feel the need to do this test. We have to keep our politicians honest, don't we? Of course, we may discover that the senator is absolutely right, in which case this is just a video on YouTube and you can forget all about it. However, we may find that the senator and the congresswoman are in fact hugely disingenuous and they're looking to infringe upon your rights again. If that's the case, I will trust you, dear viewer, to disseminate this information far and wide.
Hey guys, so as I said inside, we are set up to see if we can test these moderators, see if the good senator is full of it or not. I've got 2 microphones set up, obviously one on my person, which I'll be able to mute. And the rest of the time you'll be able to hear me. Starting with the 2.2 long rifle, unsuppressed, Ely subsonics. Let's put 3 of these downrange and see where we end up. Nearly forgot. Bear with me, guys. Have some passing wildlife. Okay, good to go. Okay, let's move on to the 1.7. So, 1.7 H.E.A.R now, unsuppressed. Okay, now on to the big stuff. Okay, 243 Winchester, unsuppressed. Suspect this might be a little bit bang bang. And shotguns now. So as I mentioned before, unsuppressed, we'll go with the Benelli. This has the same length barrel as the Pedretti. And back around to the 2.2 now with the Supersonics. So these are the Mini Mags 2.2, unsuppressed. Okay, we'll take a short break now and then we'll try the suppressed weapons. Now the suppressed 2.2 again, Healy Subsonics. Let's send 3 of these. Pretty quiet, I'd say. 17 H.E.A.R suppressed. Not that quiet. And now 243 suppressed. Not all that quiet. And now the interesting one, 12 gauge suppressed. And I'll tell you something, alongside the Benelli, that's an unforgiving gun. And now, last but not least, it's the 2.2 again, suppressed, this time with the supersonics, the mini mags. And that concludes the sciencing the shit out of it part of this particular video. We'll head back inside now, take a look at the results, crunch some numbers, and see what we've discovered.
Hi guys. So, turns out going back inside actually took until tomorrow. That's if what was tomorrow yesterday is now today. But there we are. It is what it is. Let's review what we've discovered and see what it tells us. I'm going to start naturally at the end, because outside I was firing the subsonic 2.2 ammunition first, as you'll have noticed, and because it's so quiet, because it needs some special attention, we'll leave that until the end. We will start with 12 gauge. No particular reason other than I kind of like 12 gauge. As you can see here, our peak sound readings at that 35 to 40 yard distance gave us a mean average of 94.36 decibels. For reference, that's a similar volume to standing next to a revving sports motorcycle. So seriously quite loud, something that would damage your hearing in the not too short term. In contrast, as you can see, through the suppressed 12 gauge, we came out with a much lower average, which is about 4 decibels lower. Now, it's an interesting thing to note that the way decibels work is not a linear scale, it's a logarithmic scale, which means that it's actually quite a bit quieter. But it's not that quiet. 90 decibels is a bit like standing next to a running petrol or gas lawnmower. So while it's not quite as bad as being next to a revving sports bike, it's still bloody loud, and it's not something that's going to creep up on you in the instance of an active shooter situation. So when it comes to 12 gauge, I'm sorry, Senator, it looks like you're not telling the truth. We'll move on to 2.2 rimfire supersonic, the CCI minimags through the Tipman. Without the suppressor, as you can see, we're getting a sound reading in the region of 86 decibels. Now you'll note that this is a little quieter than the suppressed 12 gauge, and that's fair enough. 2.2 long rifle is a small round. It's only rimfire, it's no monster of a cartridge. We shouldn't be surprised that it's relatively quiet, but it's still not that quiet. For a frame of reference, 86 decibels is about the volume of a very loud restaurant. Imagine a restaurant with 100 covers full of people, everyone's had a few beers, quite rowdy. It's not a quiet place, it's not something you wouldn't notice. Now, how did the suppressor affect this? That's a great question. Well, here are the results suppressed. And again, we do see a reduction in the sound output at that 35 to 40 yard range, but still not that significant. It's about 6 decibels, and that means the restaurant's a little quieter. 20 people have gone home, and not quite as many people are as blind drunk as they were before, but it's still pretty loud and something you can't ignore. If you weren't in the mood, it's a volume level that would probably annoy you. Sorry, Senator, we're still not finding your words to be entirely honest, are we? On to the 1.7 H.E.A.R now, and as I said before we went out, that is a much faster cartridge. It's certainly going to be quite snappy. Without the suppressor, as you can see, we're in the range of 90-91 decibels. And if you remember, we're back next to that lawnmower. Pretty loud, pretty irritating, certainly not something you can ignore or not notice. Now, the suppressor is going to make a difference, of course, but again, we can see the suppressor does not silence by any means this shot. It takes the edge off again, makes things a little more comfortable, but we're still back to standing next to that lawnmower. And I don't like standing next to lawnmowers, let alone pushing them round the lawn. So to our centerfire test now, the 243 Winchester. And as you can see, without the suppressor, we're looking at quite a lot more noise here. We're back into the 12 gauge range and beyond, and our average here is approaching 95 decibels. To give you again a frame of reference for that, those of you who are married will fully understand me when I tell you this is akin to your wife screaming in your face. And I mean right in your face. You know those terrible arguments, the worst ones, the ones you wish never happened, when she's right up in your face screaming. Well, that's not a noise you can ignore, and it's something a lot of us can recognise and understand. To give you a frame of reference, ladies, if you're watching, I apologise for mocking the way wives may shout at their husbands. But if your husband has a chainsaw and you've ever stood about, 10 feet away, that's about the same. Again, looking at the suppressed numbers, you can see we're down to the 90-91 decibel range. And I say down, that's still very loud. That's as if your wife has moved back a couple of feet and is not in your face anymore, but she's still screaming. Ladies, I'm sorry, I can't help myself, I'm married. It's still akin to that chainsaw. You've just moved a little closer to the house, a little further away from the tree. This is akin to a very, very loud restaurant. Think nightclub, early hours at a nightclub. This is loud. There's no way that this sound is creeping up on you. This gunfire is very clearly gunfire. There'd be no hiding. So finally, we come around to the subsonics, the H.E.A.R 2.2 hollow point subsonic. As I said before we went out, these are designed specifically to be quiet. They don't break the sound barrier, and you'll have noticed in the video that you don't get that crack as the shot leaves the barrel. This is exactly what they're for. These aren't the quietest rounds in the world, but they're close, they're pretty close. Even so, unsuppressed, you're seeing sound levels approaching 80 decibels, around the 79 decibel mark, as you can see, which is still in the region of that restaurant, but we don't want to go back to that restaurant again, so I'm going to compare it to heavy traffic, heavy rush hour traffic. So still a significant noise level, not something you wouldn't notice, but it does lack that distinctive crack as the sound barrier is broken. Now it's here where you're seeing the suppressor really come into its own. As you can see, we're looking at noise levels down into the 60s. We've not seen the 60s up until this point, and this is definitely much quieter. It's a long way from being silent, although on the video you'll note it appears silent. You can actually hear the gun cycle. Now, the best description I can find to match this noise level is really a sewing machine. If you can imagine sitting at an electric sewing machine, it's that level of noise. So while the senator may have an argument when it comes to a high quality suppressor combined with subsonic ammunition, this is the exception rather than the rule, as you can see. So what can we take from this? Well, first of all, I can say I'm interested. I'm glad to have seen these results. I really wanted to know how my suppressed shotgun was going to perform in comparison. I can certainly tell the difference when I use it. At the shooter's range, right next to the breech, the difference is colossal. I can tell you, it feels about half the output. The trade-off, of course, is the shotgun is not very forgiving at all. Of course, it's very basic. It's a very simple solid stock. It doesn't have the inertia system that the Benelli has, nor does it have the cushioning. And it is, as I say, unforgiving on the shoulder. But I'm very pleased with it. I'm impressed with the level of moderation supplied. What can we really take away here? First of all, I can say this, and I'll say it with confidence. Yes, subsonic ammunition combined with a high quality suppressor does make gunfire much quieter. But as you've seen, even with the lightest, smallest subsonic ammunition, the H.E.A.R, I'm sure, is not the quietest long rifle subsonic ammunition there is, but it's pretty close. It's in the ballpark. I know there are some specialist rounds out there. H.E.A.R Super Sniper comes to mind, but we're in the ballpark. And even then, silencer is definitely not the truth. There has been of late development in centerfire subsonic ammunition. Most notably is the 300 Blackout. And what I can tell you about that is it has taken a great deal of research and effort to make that happen. And even in those cases, it's nowhere near as quiet as the 2.2. I will say this: any politician who was approaching this issue with a genuine wish to do two things: one, help the public, and two, preserve the Constitution as they swore to do, would be looking at the ammunition first and not the arms themselves. That said, any restriction, in my opinion, on arms or ammunition is by definition an infringement of the Second Amendment. But that is a different argument. It's a conversation for another day. Without getting too much into the weeds, it's clear that the only example that fits the Senator's bill are combined subsonic ammunitions and suppressors. This is not something that the law he's putting forward mentions. This is not something he has mentioned in any speeches, and I suspect very strongly it's not something he's either researched or is even aware of. In the real world, the everyday real world, there are two key benefits of suppressors. One is a benefit to the user. It does substantially reduce the immediate noise of a gunshot. And by immediate, I mean location-wise. For the person actually pulling the trigger, the noise is reduced significantly. And with certain rounds, certain calibres in certain scenarios, this may reduce the noise output sufficiently that a hunter may choose to forego hearing protection. Perhaps when deer stalking, knowing they're only likely to fire one, maybe two shots in the whole day of deer stalking, they may choose to forego hearing protection for the day, allowing them to listen to their environment, to concentrate on the environment and their surroundings, knowing that when they do come to fire their rifle once or twice in the day, that the sound is not going to permanently damage their hearing. The second example I can think of relates really specifically to the 2.2 long rifle for a protracted rabbit hunting, bunny hunting session. Where I live, sometimes we are required to cull rabbits. There are very, very many rabbits around. It can be a problem for farmers, and we may go out on a night shoot or an evening shoot with the specific aim of bagging many rabbits. Now, I don't know how much wildlife you've met, but generally a loud rifle shot sends everything running for the hedges and the holes, and they're gone. With the 2.2 long rifle subsonics and a good suppressor, it's possible to keep shooting for a good while because they don't notice, they don't mind. Now, there's one thing about suppressors I haven't mentioned, and I've been saving it for now. It is a fact that a suppressor on a firearm does, to a certain extent, obfuscate the location of the gunshot. One thing I have not touched on is the ability of a suppressor to obfuscate the location of a gunshot. Now, let me clarify this. If I go out with my deer rifle and I take one shot, it's very, very easy for somebody 50 yards away to know where that noise came from. They're going to be able to locate it. However, if I'm using a suppressor and they are 500 yards away, they will have a very hard time pinpointing where that sound came from. Now, I have seen certain articles on the internet suggesting that this would aid a mass shooter in avoiding detection, and the police would have a hard time knowing where they were. Well, that's not the case. When it comes to what we'll call active shooter situations, very often these things are occurring at relatively short range, 30, 20, less yards. Very often they're happening inside buildings. And I can assure you that a suppressor is not going to hide your location at all if you're inside a building. In fact, inside a building, they're not going to make a great deal of difference at all. And so, to sum up, based on what we've seen here, based on my experience, it is my opinion that the Senator and the Congresswoman are indeed being disingenuous. And rather than having the public safety at heart, as they claim to do, they are in fact seeking to infringe upon the people's rights. Again, that classic agenda. While I don't want to plagiarise Paul Harrell, my opinion is based on my experience, my training. What's your opinion? What do you think? In the spirit of science, if you think there's something wrong with the experiment, if you can see fault with our approach, if you think there's something we didn't test or we need to run again, let me know. Drop a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you might do differently or what you'd like to see me do again or revisit. And we'll try and make sure that we're being as systematic and fair and clear as possible. The only way we can keep our politicians honest is to put to the test that which they present to us. What we should never do is just take what they say as gospel. We should always question everything. That doesn't mean that they're lying, but it does mean we should be critical of them and make sure that they're not lying to us. In this instance, I'm sorry to say it is my opinion, it is my belief that the Senator and the Congresswoman have an agenda, and this is how they're pursuing it. They wish to curtail your access to a perfectly legitimate accessory for your firearms. That falls under arms. Your right to bear arms shall not be infringed. You must ensure it isn't. So thank you. If you've made it all the way to the end of the video, give me a thumbs up, and if you like the content, do subscribe to the channel. It helps me enormously. I've got lots more content coming up, and every interaction you can give me really helps the channel grow, and that'll enable me to produce more, to refine my skills, maybe even become capable at video editing, so it's not choppy and noisy and awful like what you're tolerating now. And that again is why I always encourage people to comment. You don't have to sing my praises. By all means, you can tell me I'm a fool if that's what you think, but do try and guide me. Let me know how I can make this experience better for you. Thanks again, as always. Take care of yourselves and you stay peaceful.